a startup founder, bootstrap startup, pre-revenue, and I'm looking into incentives and how to structure things. And this is a video that I wish I would have seen a lot earlier in my career. I honestly am still figuring this out, but I want to talk about this because sometimes it just takes like hearing something from 5 different angles before it sits in. To give you an anecdote on why this matters, I was part of an early startup when I was like 23 or 24, and they didn't offer me any stock options. But I treated that job like I was like the founding engineer. I put everything into it, and I didn't even know that I had the option to have equity in the company. And now I believe the company is doing very well. But if I would have been more aware of it then I would have negotiated that as part of my equity or my hiring package. And if that was a hard no for the founder, then that would have raised some serious flags in my mind about what kind of company and relationship we would have. I think it's a great way to incentivize people, but the problem, as we're going to see shortly, is that no one really understands how it works unless you're pretty far into the game. And that's something I want to address proactively head on right now. So I think this video is from a founder who explains it very well. Funnily enough, he talks about in the title is the problem with startup stock options, but it's actually a positive video about how great they are. So without further ado, let's learn.
Stock options, which breaks my heart as a founder because they're get how they really work. So much so that this is an actual number. 55% of startup employees in the US never exercise their stock options, which breaks my heart as a founder because they're a sacrifice that we founders make.
By the way, I'm not a lawyer at all. This is not legal advice. This is just me trying to learn along with you. And when he says they don't exercise that options, what I think that means is that they don't actually get paid for what they owned.
To give them this stock, and we have to negotiate with investors and everything. Well, just like any legal startup document, it honestly sounds like it's made deliberately complicated just to mess with you, but it's not. It's just that dealing with company shares isn't easy from the legal standpoint. But that's what our one-on-one series is here for.
Yeah, the more I look into this, the more I'm actually appreciating like how cool of a financial instrument this is, but it's nuanced, and it's very confusing, especially if this is like the first time you're hearing it. So I feel that. Let's keep going.
Okay, so in case you're totally new to this world, it is customary for startups, at least in the US, to offer a stock option pool to crucial employees and to crucial hires. Now, many people think that these are actual company shares, and they're not. So let's start by clarifying that difference. When founders establish the company, they incorporate it, they define a number of shares, and they split it. How many shares each founder gets determines the percentage of the company that they own. To give you an example, say a founder gets 500,000 shares. And
by the way, you don't even have to worry about this right away. Like, I'm years into my startup. It's just been a single member LLC. This whole time I've moved multiple states, and it's been different LLCs because I had to form it in each state I moved into. So when he's saying you form it when the company is created, it's like there's not really much going on until you make money. So you don't have to like pause everything just to learn the nitty gritty and even hire a lawyer to do this. Like you can just do it on your own and not even have an LLC. An LLC is nice because you have some liability protection, but you don't need to issue stock options when just to create an LLC or to get up and running.
And then the entire company was registered with 1 million shares. They're, of course, getting 50% of the company. Now, the number of shares that they get rarely changes. They rarely exchange hands. When investors join, what happens is that new shares get issued in the company. So the 500,000 shares of stock represent a smaller percentage of the entire company, but that founder still has the same 500,000 shares. Now, when the company gets established, when you register your corporation, shares are worth nothing. Since the business doesn't really exist, there's no revenue, there's no IP, then each share is probably worth fractions of a cent of a dollar. So there are no tax implications in you receiving those shares from this business. But the moment a company raises capital, shares acquire value. Let's say that this company raises $1 million in a seed round in exchange for 20% of the company. That means that 250,000 new shares are going to be issued to that investor, and then the entire company is going to be officially worth $5 million, which means that
This is specific to like venture companies. I think it's actually simpler if you're just bootstrapping and you're not raising rounds of funding, which affects the valuation. But I actually don't know the tax implications and how that changes. I think it only matters once you generate revenue, or there's some kind of fair market value on what your company's actually worth. Or maybe it's just when you exercise the options. I'm not sure, but just keep in mind this is for like venture-backed companies where it's like pre-seed, then they raise a seed round, they agree at that valuation, then they raise a Series A, and then the valuation's higher. And so that money on paper actually is, in theory, actually worth something if you could sell it or exercise your options. Let's go.
the new price per share is $4. We have a whole much more thorough video on this breakdown. I'm going to link that in the description. But the point here is that's $2 million in value for those shares that the founder owns. Now, when employee stock option pools are created, then a new set of shares is going to get issued. Again, shares are not exchanging hands. The company just issues new shares that are going to be used for this pool. But those shares have value. If the company hired an employee and say offered them 10,000 shares of this company as part of their stock option plan, the effective value of those shares is $40,000 at $4 a share. Now, in the US, you just can't give somebody $40,000 worth of anything and not have a tax implication. If the company gave the employee those shares, then that would become a taxable income. Moreover, while this is an official investor verified valuation, we all know that startups fail. So you'd be paying taxes on those $40,000 regardless of the company's fate. And that's why employee stock options don't work like that. Instead, they're given options. They're not stock, they're stock options. Stock options are the option to purchase shares of stock at a fixed strike price. So what the company does is offer the employee the option to buy 10,000 shares at $4 a share, which is the current fair market value of that share according to the latest actual company valuation. So the employee doesn't own these shares, mind you. They just have the option to purchase them at a fixed $4 price, regardless of what happens with the company. So let's say that in the future, the company gets acquired. The buyer decides to acquire the company for $50 million. And that means that they're paying $40 per share. I'm oversimplifying a huge journey of multiple rounds of funding, etc.
Another open question I have is, when there's no acquirer, what can you do? For example, I think OpenAI made news when they offered to buy back employee shares. So they didn't sell their company to anyone, but they still gave the employees an option to profit and exercise their shares, as I understand. I think that's what's happening. But again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I think there are ways to make this work other than just getting acquired or going public,
etc. But let's just keep it simple. Now, this is where stock options are really exciting, because this employee now has the possibility to buy 10,000 shares at $4 a share and then sell them to this acquirer for $40 a share, which is what he's paying, leaving them with a $36 per share profit, or in this case, $360,000. So this is the key about stock options. They're only worth it if the company increases in value after you have received them. And that's why they're such a fantastic incentive for employees, and with a clever system that doesn't create an immediate tax liability. Now, here's a challenge. Stock options can expire. Most plans have an expiration date of 10 years and also expire if the employee leaves the company. Employees usually have 30 to 90 days to decide if they want to exercise, which means buy, purchase, the stock options after they leave the company for most reasons. So let me give you a very real world scenario. In 2017, Uber had become one of the most valuable private companies in existence. Estimations ran at around $120 billion based on their last actual investor valuation. So let's take a scenario of an employee that wanted to quit the company. Say they had received 0.01% of the company in stock options, and that they were issued a few years back when the company was valued at just $1 billion, which is still a massive increase. So the strike price to purchase that stock option package was, say, $100,000. With Uber's massive fundraising rounds and valuation increase, those shares are now worth $1.2 million. So clearly, you do not want to walk out of that kind of money. Stock options can dollars.
The math is crazy. I think when you see on paper 0.01%, you're like, what the heck? That's nothing. And then when you see those numbers, it's like, oh yeah, this is real money. However, remember, this is VC numbers. So Uber's, unicorn $1 billion, I'm sure closer to $1 trillion now, valued company. Whereas if you're going just normal bootstrap company, you're talking probably tens of millions, hundreds of millions. That's just a more realistic expectation. So 0.01% just isn't going to be as much. So because you're not going to make as much, but you're also not going to have more, you're not going to have investors to share the equity with. I think for those types of companies, it makes sense that the employees would get more, respectively. The part I'm trying to learn about is what is like a standard rate for each employee along the way based on like a bootstrap company. Like if you're an employee on day one, you're a founder, basically. If you showed up after a year of no revenue, but we're out in the market, well, that's probably like a founding engineer situation. If that's what you were doing, you're the coder, you're taking over. If you showed up 3 years later, and it's like steady and solid, and like you're not taking much risk at all, right? It's just like trying to get some rules of thumbs for these numbers is useful. Let's go.
So clearly, you do not want to walk out of that kind of money. Stock options can genuinely be life-changing money for an employee, as close as it can get to being a founder. The problem was that Uber wasn't planning on going public. There was no visibility on this yet. That meant that the employee would have to buy the stock and then hold it until the company was either sold or became traded publicly. And honestly, few people have $100,000 lying around. So cases like this one sparked companies like...
Okay, now he's gonna pitch the sponsor of the video, I think, and they're like, hey, if you can't pay for your options, we'll help you out. Let's go.
So a common vesting structure is 4 years. Say on this 10,000 share pool, this means that each month the employee would get access to around 208 stock options. This adds up to 10,000 stock options after 48 months. Another common rule in vesting is a cliff, which requires a minimum amount of time working for that company. For example, the vesting agreement my co-founders and I used was exactly this one. It was a 1-year cliff and then a 4-year vesting. Using that 10,000 share example, this means that by month 11, you will have earned 0 shares. That means if you quit, you don't get any equity. On month 12, you get your first batch of 2,500 shares. And after that, you vest monthly, 280 shares per month. So
I think that's another really cool part of the financial
mechanism. Of 2,500.
If I could summarize how cool this is, it's like no tax payments until it actually works, if it works, and also you don't get the money and you don't get to just run, and like you don't get it on day one and then you quit and then you chill while everyone else busts their butt working to grow the company. It's like, no, you gotta wait a whole year and then we'll gradually pay it out. And I feel like that's a fair way to view this.
500 shares, and after that you vest monthly 280 shares.
But by the way, it doesn't have to be that way. So I've heard horror stories of people who don't set up this vesting cliff structure, and they find their engineer. Hold on, I'm doing this guy dirty by pausing it here. Hold on. There we go. They hire an engineer and they give them equity, but they don't have the equity weight. There's no cliff or vesting period, and then the engineer gets demotivated, and then they just leave and they get a normal job, and all the while they're still owners of the company, and that puts the founder in a tough position to raise money because you gotta explain that, and also you can't give as much to the next engineer that you do hire, even though you set it up better the second time. So takeaway here is having a vesting period and a cliff, as everyone tells me, is the way to go.
You vest monthly, 280 shares per month. So vesting is really important because it protects the company from an employee leaving early. And getting back to stock options, remember this one thing: value is very much tied to the value that you manage to add to the business with your work. If the business doesn't increase in value, then stock options aren't really good for anything. Let us know in the comments if you have any questions. I'm going to
Okay, I don't know if that helped. That I've watched this 3 times now, and every time it's getting a little more clear. Let's see what people in the comments think. They like it. They like it. I mean, not that many views, so I feel like this is still like a niche thing that people just don't. You don't have to learn about it until like this is actually an option for you, and then it's kind of like a scramble. And I feel like people who even have options don't understand what it works. I don't know if that last sentence even made sense. I'm kind of distracted reading the comments. All right. Here's an interesting question on Reddit. Has anyone actually made money from startup equity? It feels like it's less than 5% useful. Okay. So we have a couple people who said they got some money from Duolingo, from Uber, and then they worked at another company and it imploded. So as we heard in the beginning of that video, 55% don't exercise their options. So I would say it sounds like 45% of people with stock options actually get some money back from it. This guy's been lucky apparently. So he joined post IPO, but before they were profitable. Interesting situation, but happens a lot nowadays. Blah blah blah. Rough payout just from company shares was 600K. So this guy got some money. The second company blew up before it could turn into anything. Sad. And it looks like maybe on paper he has 1.5 M's. So he's 2 for 3 on his picks. That's pretty good. All right. Interesting. I worked at a startup a long time ago who just gave out large bonuses instead of equity because they had no plans to go public ever. The bonuses varied greatly depending on the year or quarter, so there's no guarantee, but they were being honest and transparent. Interesting. I mean, that seems like another way to incentivize people without it being so formal. I'm just like, yeah, duh, bonuses work. I guess the downside with bonuses in my mind is that, yeah, you can't know what you're going to get ahead of time. Maybe there's a rule of thumb, whatever percentage based on revenue or a little bump from last year. I'd be curious how motivating it is to know that you're going to get a bonus at the end of the year versus knowing you might get a 5%, well, probably not 5, like 1 to 4% of the entire company's value at one point in time. Ooh, this guy's worked at 5. Wow. First one made 45K. got bought out. He quit. The third one might have been 150K, and then the other ones didn't work. That kind of checks out with the math that we were looking at before. Yeah, and then he's talking about how he's at a cozy job, just making money. And I think, yeah, I feel like this is different thinking about being an early engineer at a company where you're getting meaningful equity versus being at Google, and you will still get some equity, but it's not going to be as much percentage wise, but still the payouts are still solid and good there. Oh, he was early Quibi. Okay. They're like famous for just burning money. Ooh, some data. Let's look at some data. Dissecting startup rates. Oh, shoot. I need an account. Okay, we're not reading that. Okay, interesting topic. Lots of thoughts here, lots of confusion. My takeaway here is it's a really interesting financial instrument. I don't love how complicated it is legally to set it up. I don't like how confused people are about it, including myself. I like how there's protections around when the equity turns real, when you have your vesting and cliff situation we saw at the end. I like how there's no tax until it becomes real money to simplify things. For me, I would feel more motivated having equity compared to just a bonus because I feel like I'd be in more control. But also remember, again, this is not legal advice, but remember you don't need to set this up on day one. You can just focus on helping your customers and getting up and running. And this is something that can happen down the road. Okay. So if you want to learn more about my app, my company, it's compasscalendar.com. It's a productivity suite for people who work on the computer a lot. There's a link in the description, and I've been live streaming every day until the end of the year, picking different topics every day. And today we talked about startup equity. Here's the log of the other things we did every other day if you want to check those out. And if you have experience receiving equity or issuing it from a startup, let me know in the comments. I'd be curious how it went for you. But for now, that's it for the stream. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.